So Stephanie Shipp and I have, I think, an interesting conversation that we'd like to have. And Stephanie gave the keynote at Women Leading Regeneration in April. And, you know, Stephanie has shared with me, you know, the context that we've been inside of since we were together at our first event, which we were all living in the global pandemic. We've now had added to our shared experience this uprising of attention to deep inequities in our culture around how people of color and Black people are experiencing life, their sense of insecurity and danger and exposure to things that many of us, simply because of the color of our skin, don't experience in the same way. And I think it's extraordinarily important for us to be willing to listen and hear what is different in our realities inside of our country. And for those of us who do not have that as an experience, to become curious and inspired to see that that begins to deeply change, because no one should worry about walking out their door and doing something totally normal and having themselves confronted by police treating them as if they're potentially a criminal. It's unconscionable. So, and there's a lot more to this story, as you all know. So Stephanie, I want to welcome you again and just give my deep love and gratitude for your willingness to have, I think, what is in many ways a challenging conversation sometimes to have.
Yeah, totally can be a challenging conversation. It's, you know, you and I talked a little bit in preparation for today. I'll just be transparent about that. And one of the things we talked about is how do we get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations? And that's on both sides of the table.
Yes, absolutely. And I think one of the things that struck me when we were talking was some of the stories that you shared around the things that I think people need to hear. And one of the key pieces that we talked about was the power of listening.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Will you speak to that piece of this? Because I want all of us to take that in deeply and to hear it from you.
Yeah, I will reflect back on part of, for those who weren't with us in April, we talked about sisterhood and we talked about what that means. And by the way, for those who don't identify to be part of the sisterhood, we also talked about brothers and how they participate in the relationship as well. So if you think of it as a relationship of family and how we support one another, and that starts with us seeing each other. And so that's, you know, the very first part of having a conversation with someone is really seeing them holistically and in totality in terms of who they are. And I'll be very specific today. Most of what I'm going to reference today is from my personal perspective as a Black woman in America. That's how I identify. Actually, that's all I've ever been my entire life. So, but I need folks to, and my request is for folks to start with seeing me and seeing people who are like me. You know, I often hear a phrase that says, I don't see color. Well, I would submit that if you don't see color, be it a color of flower or a color of a shirt or my favorite pair of shoes, then you've missed out on the beauty. And if you don't see the color of the people around you, then you've missed a key portion of their experience and who they are. And as a Black woman in America, seeing me, there are times when people will see me, and depending on the setting that I'm in or the clothes that I may be wearing, they may make an assessment of me depending on their own personal unconscious biases, or in some cases, conscious biases. one of the stories that Selene and I talked about is we shared our mutual love. She's got a love for hats. I've got a love for shoes. And I shared with her the experience of going into one particular upscale ladies clothing store. And it was near the holidays, and I was looking for a red dress. By the way, red happens to be my favorite color, but it was the holidays. So I was looking for a red dress, and immediately upon walking in the door, and I think that day I may have had on some jeans and a t-shirt and maybe some Vans sneakers. I don't know. I was comfortable. I was shopping. And immediately upon walking in the door, an Anglo woman walked up to me and she said, "May I help you?" I said, "Not at the moment. I'm just going to look. I'm actually looking for a holiday dress." And before I could take any further steps much further into the store, her immediate response to me was, "Well, I need you to know that we don't have layaway." And so if you don't know what layaway is, if that doesn't resonate with you, it means that you don't have enough money to pay for it then. So you put it on hold with a small amount of money and you pay for it over time. And immediately she had made an assessment of what I could and could not afford based on a visual, I guess, biases. I nodded my head, told her thank you, and I proceeded to go shopping through the store and picked up quite a few things that I was interested in. Walked to the counter after some time with my items in my hand, laid my platinum card on the counter, and she was then overly joyed to see me. And I expressed to her, because of her rudeness to me, that I would not be making these purchases. And then I waved her goodbye and I left. But that is just a small example, yet a safe example of part of my life as being a Black woman. I'll tell one more story and then I'd like to, wherever you want us to go from there, Selene. My former husband is actually a police officer or a retired police officer. And I often got the question, aren't you afraid of him being a police officer and what that means in terms of his safety? And my answer was always, no, I'm not afraid of him being a police officer. And here's why. Because when he goes to work, he has a gun, he has a taser, he has handcuffs, he's got all of these apparatuses, a bulletproof vest. I said, but where I do worry about him is when he's off duty and he's a Black man in America. Now I'm going to let that sit with you right there for just a second. I was more afraid of him being a Black man just in America, off duty, out of the uniform, than I was of him being in uniform as a police officer. So just two small stories in a snippet, which, I'd like for us to go wherever you want to go from here, Selene.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those two stories because they are both reflective of what is not acceptable in our society. And I know that what I think is another layer to this that I'd like for us to talk about is what in your mind, because I'm interested to hear from you, how do you recommend we start to transform, and what can someone like me do to activate transformational either conversation or actions that will take this moment in time and actually have it truly be a reset in our society?
I'm hoping it is more than a moment. I am truly hoping that it is a movement, that we are moving towards something more positive. But by way of actions, I would say there are those, people who don't really believe, they think these are one-off cases. And by the way, one of the things we referenced was around the relationships between Blacks or people of color and the police. Within the US, and I speak specifically about the US because that's where I live, there has been systematic forms of racism built into almost every facet of our world, be it from redlining, which says where Black people can live, to Jim Crow laws that didn't allow us to vote up until a certain period of time, even to today, where there is voter suppression, where when it's time to vote and have elections, that some election offices are closed in the minority community, so we can't vote, or our identifications are not taken. Or even if you take it into the corporate setting, if you look at the boards and the leadership of organizations, very often being in those positions is not something that you see people of color. And after 400 years of being in this country, regardless of how we got here, you would expect that we'd be further along. We're not. And so I would say, first, acknowledge that fact that things are just not as good and rosy as they seem. You know, there's always a point of reference that says, you know, the US elected a Black president, and so the world is all good now. No, the US elected a Black president, and then some folks suppressed their feelings, and other folks, it inflamed their feelings, and they felt more emblazoned to have those conversations or say things. And so acknowledge what we have going on. And then for your friends who you want to be allies for, listen. Just listen to them. Make space and time for them to share to the extent that they want to. It's okay to say, I see you. I know there's things going on. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do, but I'm here if you want to talk. And then you make space for them to talk, versus to tell me how you're feeling. How is this all affecting you? You know, it's almost as though you're asking someone who just got a diagnosis to tell you about the diagnosis and tell you about the treatments they're going through. So consider it in that manner. And as they share, please don't attempt to explain, explain or justify, oh, it must have been this, or it must, just listen and educate yourself. Once you hear some of these things, it's really important to educate yourself, because if you're like I am, I grew up in the state of North Carolina in the US, and I took world history and I took US history. US history has omitted actual history of Native Americans or Black Americans and their contributions to the growth of America. You're not going to read, unless, well, now you have privy to online searches, but you can read about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where that was the first place of prosperity, one of the bigger places of prosperity in the US. And there are some who say without Black Wall Street in Tulsa, that you wouldn't have Wall Street, New York. But I will tell you that there was a massacre of over 300 people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, because, as some felt, the Blacks were getting too prosperous and were out of their place. It won't tell you stories of Tuskegee experiment, where medical practitioners intentionally gave Black men syphilis to see how their bodies would respond, because they thought Black people were different. But then those bodies, those gentlemen, went back to their families, and it proliferated from there. Most people will not tell you about Henrietta Lacks, who was a Black woman that was ill, and they took some of her cells and they realized they were regenerating themselves and doing some amazing things. And so without her permission, they took her cells, and actually they were used to create such medicines as penicillin and other things. Or that longer than that, there were medical procedures done on Black women before the turn of the 19th century, and no anesthesia was given to them because it was thought that Black women didn't feel pain, or that Black people in general didn't feel pain. So go, see us, hear us, and then go educate yourself. And then after that, stand up and talk. I would say that educate other people around you. And if you are in the room when derogatory things or inappropriate racial things are being said and you say nothing, to some extent, well, not to a full extent, you are complicit. I would liken it to the officers, if you've seen the George Floyd video. of the gentleman who was murdered in Minneapolis. 8 minutes and 47 seconds, 46 seconds. There were 3 other officers with him who did nothing. They are complicit in his behavior. You stand and you are in a room when things are said, or if you watch some other person being victimized by the police or others, and you watch and you say nothing or you do nothing, you are complicit. If you see a Black person and you make an assumption that just because you've never seen them, you feel like they're out of place and they don't belong, and you decide to call 911 because maybe they're in Central Park watching birds, or they're at the park having a picnic, or there's some kids selling water, and you call 911, or you watch someone call 911 and you don't come to their defense, you are part of the problem. So help and call people on their stuff. That's where the help is needed. So I'll pause right there because I feel like I kind of went on a diatribe. But
it's all right. But I think it's something that you said that I think just we need to restate is also we have to become active in how we show up in the world. And if we see something happening around us, it's incumbent upon us as a citizen, as a fellow human being, to not shy away from an uncomfortable moment and to call something out. And I think that's going to be a very interesting journey for each one of us in our own lives to figure out stepping up with that kind of sincerity, of respect and courage. And I think a lot of this can be done in a way that is from kindness versus a viciousness, because I think that is also really important. If we see something going on, we need to address it, but address it from compassion first.
It's a what and a how. And there are going to be some instances that, if I'm being honest, may not get my compassion. You know, I would liken it to if I were somewhere in public and I saw someone abusing a child. I'm sorry, I'm going to intervene. I am not going to, they're not going to get much of my compassion. I'm going to try to take care of the child in that moment in time.
Yeah, me too.
Particularly if I realize these 2 people are not together and someone's being inappropriate with a child. And so I would say the same thing, you know, doing the right thing, that therein has been part of the problem. We've all been so polite and so nice, and we've been so worried about etiquette that we've let some things slide, and now it's time to speak up and speak out. Because, and I'm not advocating for violence, I'm not advocating for rioting. What I am saying is that correcting someone or intervening doesn't always come with a soft, gentle voice.
Fair point. Very fair point. Very fair point. You know, and I think as we all navigate like conversations with friends and family, actual intervening in the broader landscape, we're all going to find our way with that. But I would just say, let's please find our way. Let's make this a deep commitment. And when we go into our breakout rooms, I'll want us to talk about what that means to each one of us and how we are grappling and considering our opportunity to be part of this deep shift in how our culture is oriented. And I haven't been reading this while we're talking.
I actually saw something over here that I really want to call out because it is.
Oh, good.
When I spoke about reaching out to your friends of color, it has been an exhausting few weeks. And as much as I have enjoyed and appreciated the care, I appreciate most those reach outs that say, I care and I'm thinking about you. Be mindful that this, I didn't know George Floyd, but I have a 28-year-old son who could have easily and still could at any moment be George Floyd, just by virtue of what he looks like. And so this has been an exhausting experience. And so as you approach your friends for listening, let them offer to share versus asking them to share, because it is an emotional experience. I would liken it to PTSD. There is a post-traumatic stress disorder or a continuous stress disorder that as a Black person, you sometimes go through because we have been acculturated to help everybody else feel comfortable. It's you want others to feel comfortable, and that takes extra energy. And so in this moment in time, it's hard to have enough energy for everybody else and also sustain yourself, because it is very emotional.
That is a very compelling statement, Stephanie. And I think something, again, to consider is the emotional toll that is sort of always present.
Oh, yeah.
And then the acceleration of that activation of a long-standing state of being that has been part of the community. It hasn't ended. It hasn't been, we have not transcended the unfairness in our society that started in 1619. We haven't attended to that. And for those of you, I'm sorry, you go.
Thinking pile of poo sitting around that everybody has been ignoring, and instead of calling it the poo that it is, maybe we called it fertilizer. Or maybe it was leftovers from the dog, but we gave it every other name but what it really was, which is systemic racism. And so in order to fix this and continue to make change, that's what we're gonna have to call it out for what it is. And I know that there's a thought to say I'm anti-racist. Words are one thing, actions are another. And holding onto unconscious biases while you may not be racist, you're contributing to the oppression of people. We went through a period of time in the US where, and actually globally, where there was oppression, and it's still in some countries where there was the oppression of women based on what they could and couldn't do. So imagine, no matter your, now we take it from gender or gender identity into race, and that oppression is still continuing.
Thank you for your vulnerability, your authenticity, and willingness to be with us today and have this conversation.
Thank you for having me. And again, even in having this conversation, there's an extreme bit of vulnerability in sharing those experiences. It's if you remember Greek mythology, once Achilles had a heel that would harm him, then that's what everybody went for. And so in sharing my experiences and having this conversation is in hopes that something I say, something that's shared, will help change the world in a positive way. And so if it makes me a little uncomfortable for a little bit to do that sharing, then it's been worth it.